Hey folks, and welcome to class number 3 of the second volume of Biological Fitness. So in our first couple of classes, we've been looking at how to find support from the ground and then really make use of the internal support of the skeleton to use ground forces and pass them all the way up cleanly through the skeleton. So there was a lot of focus last time on really aiming right through the joints, right through the vertebra of the spine. And today we're going to keep kind of developing this same theme. So the movements, again, will be, in a sense, moving from the ground and up and through the skeleton, but we'll be looking at a diagonal pattern, which is maybe a little more complicated, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And this class will also really, I think, help you to create a whole body picture of a movement pattern. So we're going to be building up a pattern gradually. And as we go along, we'll be getting more specific on how every part of the skeleton really can get involved. So we're working on the floor today, lying on the back. We'll see how it goes. I may include a short variation on the belly, but for the most part, you'll be on your back. But let's begin today by standing. So please come to stand. And as you stand, consider your connection to the ground and your overall sense of uprightness. And revisiting an idea from some of the previous classes, let's explore two different ways of thinking about the relationship to the ground. So one would just be to simply think that because of gravity, the weight of your body is moving down into the ground. And to sort of exaggerate that, you could almost imagine that you were sinking into the ground. Like suppose the ground were to kind of turn into a little more of a liquid form, and you would feel yourself sinking. So the arches on your feet might flatten, you might feel your head sort of fall down onto your spine. There's a certain heaviness. Now, if you think of an opposite image, as if your head was filled with helium and it began to float upwards, you could imagine a sense of rising up away from the ground. And this doesn't mean to jump up in the air, but just if you have that sense of lift, you can think of lift in the roof of your mouth, your breastbone lifting a little bit, and a lift in the arches of your feet. Okay, so that was very quick, and it was just a kind of an imaginary thing, but if you go back and forth a little bit, just imagine that the ground underneath you were to liquefy somewhat and then become solid again, back and forth like that. You get a little sense of those two possibilities. Okay, and now leave that alone and slowly begin to bring one of your arms forward. And just like you're pointing out at shoulder height, and then bring the arm back down. And then you're going to do that again, but as you do so, listen to the weight on your feet. So do you shift your weight either towards or away from the arm that you're bringing forward and up? And if it's comfortable for you, you want to really listen to the sensation, because if you had some injury in the shoulder, there could be a limitation here how far you'd want to lift the arm. But if it's comfortable, please lift the arm higher. And if you can, even take it up towards the ceiling. And again, just notice, how do you relate to the ground when you bring the arm forward and up? Bring the arm down, and then try this with the other arm. Maybe just begin taking it out to shoulder height, taking the arm forward, like you were pointing out in front of you. Again, noticing the weight shift. Do you do the same thing with this arm? Some people will shift one way for one arm and shift the other way for the second arm, but some people tend to shift always to the same side. So just notice if there's a pattern for you. And then take the arm a little bit higher, and if it's okay for you, you take it up as if to point to the ceiling. And then you could go back and forth. Take one arm up towards the ceiling, feel how you shift the weight, and then the other. And now include that you look up to your hand. And just notice how you turn your head to see your hand. Of course, you have to orient your eyes in that direction. The chin comes a little away from the chest. Notice what the back of your head does. When you turn and tilt your head up to see one hand, notice how the back of your head, it kind of reaches down towards the shoulder on the other side. Okay, so if this is getting tiring for you, or if you're having any discomfort, then you can just stop here. But if it's okay for you, just try bringing, let's say, the left arm up and have it to the ceiling and turn to look up to the left hand. And notice, how do you use the left leg and how do you use the right leg? And then try actually lifting slowly the right heel just a little bit. So your weight will clearly come more onto the left leg when you do that. But see if there's a way that lifting the left heel can actually give you a sense of rising up to see the left hand. Okay, and then bring the arm down. Take the right arm up to the ceiling and look up to the right hand as you lift the left heel. Let's see if that lift can really translate straight up through the spine. Or do you feel that there's some place in your spine where the movement kind of cuts across? And for anyone, the experience may be different on one side compared to the other. Okay, but so there's something that we're doing here about reaching up. You have a sense of that. So now please come down and rest on your back on the floor. And now, as we often do at the beginning of an awareness through movement lesson, we're going to take a couple minutes to clarify the body image. We're going to do this in a kind of a little bit of a different way this time, leading into our exploration. So think of your left heel, and then move your attention up the left leg to the knee, and up into the left side of your groin, imagining the ball of the femur and the hip joint. And then just imagine that whole line from the left heel to the left hip joint. But from here, can you now imagine a diagonal line from your left hip up to your right shoulder? Imagine, like if you were in a car, how you would have a seatbelt strapped from one hip over to the opposite shoulder. And you can imagine this line along the front of your body. You can imagine this line along the back of your body. Now feel your right arm, how it rests on the floor. And feel the right side of your neck. And then just imagine that whole diagonal path that you drew from your left heel to the left hip to the right shoulder and the right side of your neck. And just notice if, having done that imaginary movement with your attention, if you sense something about that diagonal that's a little clearer. And then think of your right heel. Draw the line up to the right knee and the right hip joint. And then sense the entirety of the right leg. And then draw a diagonal line from the right hip up to the left shoulder. And again, if you like, you can spend the time to paint the line across your back and paint the line along the front. And then feel the left arm, the left side of your neck. And then review again the whole path from your right heel to your right hip to your left shoulder. And then if you were to imagine both of these diagonals that cross your torso from the left hip to the right shoulder, the right hip to the left shoulder, do you have any sense of where those two lines would cross? And again, imagine these diagonal lines along the front of your body and then along the back. All right. So now please bend your left knee and stand your left foot on the ground. You're going to keep the right leg long. And then bring your attention to your left hip. And do a very small movement of lifting the left hip a little bit further away from the ground. Of course, it's already lifted and higher off the ground than the right hip, but just lift it a little bit. Feel the pelvis turn and then let it go back to where it began. But as you make this movement, small movement, gentle movement, observe how you do this. In particular, what's happening with your left knee and your left foot? So for many people in this position, when they lift the left hip and they begin to roll the pelvis to the right, they also begin to tilt the left knee to the right. And this, of course, lifts the weight off the outer edge of the left foot and it brings it more to the inner edge, probably towards the big toe. Just sense if that's what's happening for you. And in fact, if you're doing something different than that, go ahead and actually try that. So if you sort of press your foot into the ground to create the movement, this is a common way to generate that pattern. The knee moves to the left, the pressure moves towards the big toe, and the left hip lifts a little bit, and the pelvis rolls to the right. But what you can feel is that the sense of connection that you have to the ground, the sense of leverage with the left foot, it is fairly quickly degraded. So you could push to begin that movement, but if you kept going, you have less and less of a purchase on the ground. So come back, take a rest for a moment. And now see if it's possible to lift the left hip just a little bit without taking the left knee towards the midline. Imagine that you had a glass of water balanced on top of your left knee. And so something happens for sure in the lower leg, something happens with your left foot, but the movement doesn't displace the knee. If anything, the knee stays right where it is. Perhaps you sense a little bit of the knee lifting towards the ceiling, but just the tiniest amount. But so something that you did in an earlier class where you were investigating how to lift the inner edge of the left foot without lifting the big toe, that might come in handy here. And also just be clear that the outer edge of your left foot stays planted. So again, as you lift the left hip just a little bit, you may feel a rotation that can take place in the lower leg and in the upper leg. But you can make this movement with a sense of opening the front of the left hip, but without tilting the knee inwards. Okay, take a bit of a rest. If you want to lengthen the leg again, you can. We're going to just play with this idea a little bit more. It can be tricky sometimes. So bend your knee and stand your feet. Sorry, just your left foot. The right leg is still long. And once again, think of really keeping the outer edge of your foot connected to the ground as you slowly lift the left hip just a little bit. And now imagine as you do this, that your foot was glued to the floor. It can't go anywhere. But what if you had the idea of, rather than pushing the ground with your foot, it's as if you wanted to pull the heel in the direction of your pelvis. Now again, the foot doesn't go anywhere, but just feel if that idea activates something in your leg in a little bit of a different way that helps you lift the left hip. Okay, rest, keep your foot standing. And now just bring your attention to your breathing. Now with each in-breath, aim down into your low belly. Because of the position of the feet, you'll probably feel it'd be easier to think of expanding the right side of your belly. So with each breath in, expand downwards, thinking of breathing down into the bowl of your pelvis. That's not literally where the air goes, of course, but you can time that with the breath. And now, as you keep doing that, think of your pubic bone. Pubic bone is in the front of your pelvis, right in the center. Kind of a triangular shaped bone. And imagine that as you breathe in, as you expand the belly, you could be reaching the pubic bone down and away from your head in such a way that the right side of the pubic bone, it's like it was brushing along the inner edge of your right thigh. And see if doing this begins to actually encourage you to, again, lift the left hip a little bit. Okay, so pause for a moment. We're going to keep adding more details to this movement. So as you lie there now, place your right hand on the outside of your pelvis on the right side. Feel the large bone there. It's called the iliac crest. It's where you put your hands when people say put your hands on your hips, but just the right hand. And now you're going to, again, think of lifting the left hip, and you can imagine that the pubic bone is reaching down a little bit towards the right knee. But notice as the hip lifts and the pelvis begins to turn to the right, do you push your right hand to the right with the outside of your pelvis? You may well feel that that's a natural thing to do. But now could you use your hand to show yourself another option, which is that the pelvis, the outside of the pelvis, rather than moving to the right, it just sort of goes straight down towards the floor. And as you're generating this movement, thinking of lifting the left hip, you might even think of pulling the right hip back towards the floor. But just see if there's a way to turn the pelvis, which feels a little more like turning around the axis, not moving so far out to the right. And even though there's all these details that we're looking at, it can be a small movement. And sometimes to try to find all those details, you'll have a little more luck if you make the movement smaller, if you take your time. But again, to review, the knee stays where it is, doesn't tilt in. You might find that this idea of lifting the inner edge of the left foot, and maybe you even remember some of the details we used in that previous class, thinking of the head of the fibula on the outside of the left knee, pulling back, the bones under your knee shifting around themselves, turning to the outside. It's this internal spiraling movement, comes up the leg, and it helps you to lift the left side of your pelvis. But again, using your right hand, you're ensuring that you don't roll so far out to the right, but instead you begin to turn the pelvis a little more around itself. And of course, the left side of your back, lowest ribs, probably coming off the ground. Okay, very nice. Leave that alone now, take a rest. Just feel what's happening for you. Your left leg, your right leg. Great. Stand your left foot again. And now slowly take your left arm. Take your right arm. Your left arm can rest where it is. Your right arm, slowly sweep it along the floor away from your body, up to shoulder height, and then bring it back down to your side. Now do that again slowly, starting with the palm of the hand to the floor, but feel as you go along, is there a certain point where your arm wants to turn over? If you go slowly, you probably feel on its own, there's a moment somewhere in between having the arm at your side and having it up at shoulder height. It's just going to make sense to turn your arm over. Not just turning the hand, but a rotation of the arm that goes all the way up into the shoulder joint. So bring your arm like that up to shoulder height, out to the side. And then, to the degree that it's comfortable for you, bring the arm a little further up the floor overhead. You don't have to have the arm right by your right ear. But if you can, maybe it's 45 degrees above the shoulder. Have it somewhere up there where you can put it and leave it there comfortably. And make sure that the elbow is on the ground. So if you have the elbow in the air, maybe bring the arm a little back down in the direction of being at shoulder height, just so you can have the elbow on the floor. Okay. And now gently begin to reach your right arm along its length. Reach with the right hand. Just reach a little bit and let go. And then again, slowly reach and feel how the reaching of your right arm, it begins to invite something to happen on the right side of your chest. And as you keep making this movement, think that you're reaching your right hand away from your left hip. And feel if the reaching of the right arm begins to invite a little bit of a lifting of the left hip. And then begin to do that deliberately. So you initiate by reaching with the right hand, but now you begin to incorporate what you were already doing, lifting the left hip. And you have this whole diagonal path from your left foot up to your left hip, up to your right shoulder, and out to your right hand. As you reach your hand, as you lift the hip, you can allow your head to turn in the direction of your right arm. And then you come back and the hip lowers. And perhaps it would make sense to make these movements as you exhale. There's a sense that this could feel like a stretch. Now try to really have a sense of distributing your efforts all along this diagonal path. Okay, take a break. You can bring your arm down, lengthen your leg. And now, again, stand your left foot and bring your right arm out just to shoulder height. So not up overhead, as you were just doing, but directly pointed out to the right. And now reach with your right arm straight out to the right. And again, lift the left hip, and you can turn to see where you're reaching and feel how you lift the left side of your back and you begin to roll over to the right. If you like, you could put your left hand on the front of your body and then reach your left hand over as if you wanted to touch your right hand. And you should be probably rolling at this point, but don't forget about staying connected with your left foot to the ground. So just notice if that last movement, you started to tilt the knee inwards. Now, of course, if you go far enough, you have no choice but to do that. But see if you can roll so you bring your weight over onto the right side of your back, but only go so far that you can really keep the outside of your left foot planted and you can keep the knee where it was. There's a movement, of course, in your upper leg coming over to the right, and the pelvis rolls to the right. But what you're after here with this movement is to feel how you could get to the place of staying connected to the floor with your left foot, but bringing the weight over onto the right side of your ribs. So see if you can clarify that for yourself. And again, you can make the movement smaller. But now if you find that you just can't seem to keep the outside of the left foot down, go a little slower and think of a movement now. Again, you can imagine that the left foot was sort of glued to the ground, but imagine it was like your left foot was trying to turn a doorknob. It was kind of spinning against the floor in such a way that the left heel would go to the inside and the front of your foot would go to the outside. And again, this is an internal movement, so you don't actually change the position of your foot on the floor. But that kind of internal spiral might counteract the feeling that your foot wants to peel up off the floor. And again, you can imagine lifting up away from the floor, up through your leg. Okay, and then come back, take a rest again. And what we were just doing there is a kind of an intermediate step in where we're going. So you'll see that we're going to modify that now. Okay, bend your left knee, stand your left foot. And this time, bring your right arm back up overhead. Again, just to the degree that it's comfortable for you, but if you can, have it higher up the floor than shoulder height, somewhere out next to your head. And again, reach the right arm as you lift the left hip and turn now to look at your hand. And so that's not just simply turning to look to the right, but you have to take your chin away from your chest. Now, at first, you may or may not find this, so go slowly. But what you're inviting now is an extension through your spine. Okay, so pause for a moment. Just keep your arm overhead, and without actually moving, just imagine. You can close your eyes, but imagine seeing up to your right hand. Imagine how you would have to change the position of your head. You would both have to turn it to the right, but you would also have to take your chin up away from your chest, and the back of your head would come down towards your left shoulder. You might remember in the beginning when you were standing, looking up to your hand, and how we sensed the movement of the back of the head there. So now you're on the ground, but you're doing basically the same thing. Now, there's a few pieces that we need to put together to make this possible. So if you just simply roll your head a little to the right, you can see that you could look towards your right elbow. But to turn your head in such a way that you could see up to the right hand, you won't be rolling the head on the floor. The back of the head will have to drag backwards and down to the left. And to do this, you're going to have to bring in everything we've been doing. So again, think of lifting the left hip. And also remember this idea that we had about the movement of the pelvis. So if you come over onto the right side, the left side of your back comes away from the floor, that frees the head so that it can change position. You can look up to the right hand. But if you go too far to the right, then you may lose connection to the left foot. Okay, so come back again. I realize that maybe you're still putting this together. So this is a gradual process. Bring your right hand actually back down and have your right hand as you did before on the right side of your pelvis. And can you again lift the left hip, but use your right hand to guide your pelvis so that the right side of the pelvis, it just goes directly back towards the floor. But see if you can do this in such a way where you reach the pubic bone down and away, and at the same time, as if you still had your hand up the floor, you look up the floor. And what you're doing is shortening along your back and lengthening along the front. So the top of your breastbone is moving up and away. It's following your chin. And if you do a couple movements where you allow the pelvis to move out to the right, you'll see this is more like the experience you had when your right arm was straight out to the right, when you were reaching out to your right. But what we're looking for is a movement that, although the pelvis turns to the right, it really moves up the floor. So bring your right arm up overhead again now. And pause before you move, and just again, think of all of the elements. Have your left foot connected to the floor, and your left knee, it's almost as if it's anchored in space. You could imagine that it was leaning against something on your left. And when you move, you don't want to peel the outside of your left knee away from that surface. But as you lift the left hip, as you reach with the right arm, as you turn your head and eyes up to see the hand, all of these things are happening together. And your weight begins to roll onto the right side. But even as you roll, you're extending the front of yourself. You're reaching the pubic bone down and away. You're reaching the back of your head backwards as the chin lifts, the throat opens, and you look up towards your right hand. So each time you make the movement, just see how it is and then come back. And you might feel that one of these places isn't completely on board. So again, just review this whole idea that you're rolling to the right, but you're also arching the spine so that the head goes backwards and you're reaching, you're lengthening up the floor. There's almost a sense that the whole movement takes you up away from your left foot. Okay, very nice. Let it all go, take a rest. So this is a complex movement. There's a lot of things going on here. You may or may not have a sense of sort of having nailed it, right? But just feel that diagonal line now. From your left heel up to the left hip and up across to the right shoulder. See if there's a clarity there. It wasn't there before. Compare that to the feeling you get when you trace the line from your right heel to your right hip up to your left shoulder. And so now we're going to begin to investigate this pattern on the other side. And you know what's coming, but it will really be to your benefit to go stepwise here. And you can use the clarity of understanding of where you're going to, in fact, maybe do less work on this side and to just really work with the image of what you're doing. So now stand your right foot. You can leave your arms at your side for now. But just begin a very gentle movement again of lifting the right hip. Only lift a little and then let it go back. But right from the beginning, begin to be precise in your sense of what you're doing with your right foot, your right knee, your pelvis. You're probably not going to find all of the elements right away, but just see, what do you remember of some of the details? Can you keep the outer edge of your right foot connected to the ground as you lift the right hip? And remember, if nothing else, just make the movement smaller. But then think about that idea of generating this movement as if you were pulling your left hip backwards towards the floor. And so you could make the movement in such a way that it's just a kind of a simple rolling of the pelvis to the left. But you already know that you're going to eventually be looking for a diagonal connection up to your left shoulder, an overall sense of moving up the floor. So rather than just spilling everything over to the left, keep the right knee over the foot. Don't let it tilt inwards. And if you feel yourself pressing the floor with the foot, again, Could you generate the lifting of the right hip without so much of a sense of pushing? But maybe a mobilization that begins with the idea of lifting the inner edge of the right foot, again, not to roll to the outside, but just lifting the arch, finding that spiral that we practiced in our first class. Thinking of a turning of the bones in your lower leg towards the outside, under the kneecap. How this spiraling movement can come up the upper leg into the femur head, into the hip joint. Okay, take a rest. And then again, stand your right foot. And now slowly bring your left arm up overhead to whatever degree is comfortable for you. Again, think of keeping the elbow on the ground. So if that means not having it quite so close to your head, that's fine. And now, before you even make a movement, just imagine reaching the left arm up the floor. Don't do it, just imagine. But imagine that whole line from the left hand down to the armpit, down across to the right hip, and even down to your right foot. And as you imagine the left hand moving up the floor, just imagine that everything gets invited along. You can even imagine the sense of your eyes being pulled to look up towards the left hand, which is a movement, of course, that begins to invite the sense of arching the spine. Lifting of the eyes, it means the lifting of the chin, it means the lifting of the breastbone. Okay, so actually begin to reach with the left hand and just feel that you can coordinate this with the lifting of the right hip. And then very gradually begin to think right from the beginning of the movement that you want to see that hand as it reaches, turning your head to the left, but also dragging the back of the head down towards your right shoulder. Again, that's not going to be possible unless you begin to lift more of the right side of your back and come more over onto the left side of your ribs. Again, keep some of your attention with the right knee, with the right foot, so that you can be anchored into the ground rather than having the leg fall inwards. Just see where you're at right now. Don't try to force yourself to bring more of a result than what you can get right now. Just be happy with what it is. Bring your arm down, lengthen your leg. Now let's try something a little different that we didn't do on the other side to see if this can clarify something for you. So stand your right foot again. And now bring your right hand behind your head. Right elbow will be out to the side on the floor. And slowly, a couple times, just lift and lower your right hip gently. And go ahead and put your left hand on the outside of your pelvis. And again, try to make this movement in such a way that You don't push your hand out to the left. You don't roll so far out to the left, but the left side of your pelvis can move directly back towards the floor. Okay, now slow things way down. And now, as you lift the right hip, as the left hip pulls back towards the floor, use your right hand to drag your head down to the right. And you do this in such a way that you're always facing the ceiling. So just, you're going to end up bending the right side of your neck, and you're going to shorten the ribs on the right side. Now, of course, you can come back as you lower the hip. But as you repeat this movement and go slowly, and don't try to force yourself to go any further than just comes to you, the movement will get clearer if you repeat it gently, patiently. But really watch with your left hand that you don't begin to move your pelvis or your lowest ribs out to the left. Because the more that you can take the pelvis on the left side directly back, the more you can begin to make use of the ribs in your upper chest. So it's especially the ribs in the right armpit that are helping you to drag the head down to the right. Okay. The next time that you do that, bring your head down to the right and stay there. And now slowly, carefully sweep your left hand up overhead where you had it before. And now you can take your right hand out from behind your head, but see how without coming back to the middle in this position down to the right, you could turn your head to the left and you'd be looking up towards your left hand. Okay, so then put your right hand behind your head, come back again, but keep your left arm up overhead. And then again, lift your right hip and use your right hand to pull your head to the right, but this time turn your face so that you see up to the hand. And see how you can begin to bring these ideas together. Now, there is a way that the right side of your back needs to come off the ground because you're still going to bring the weight over onto the left side of your ribs, but your head is going to the right. So there's a counterbalance taking place. And as you do the movement, as you've been doing, reach with the left hand. So again, many, many parts, really your whole body is involved in this movement. So just try to sense the timing. And if you feel that you're overemphasizing one place, how could you find a little more connection somewhere else? Okay, come back and rest. Just notice what's that sense of the diagonal path from your right heel to your right hip joint and up to your left shoulder. And how does that compare with the first diagonal? All right, so now would you please roll to lie on your belly? And you can place one hand on top of the other and rest your head on your hands. And then bend your knees so the soles of your feet are oriented to the ceiling. And now gently lift your right knee just a little bit off the floor and then put it down. Make this movement by thinking that you're reaching your right heel towards the ceiling. Just do a little bit and put it down. Do a little bit and put it down. Okay, and then rest your legs. Now, take your left hand out and reach it up the floor. And you can turn your head, if you like, to the left, be resting on the back of your right hand now. And then again, bend your knees and orient the soles of your feet to the ceiling. And now, keeping your arm long up the floor, can you just a little bit lift your left arm a little bit off the floor and then put it down again? Just once or twice. Then pause. And now, as you lift the left arm, again, lift the right knee. So you lift the left arm and the right knee. And then as you keep going, lift your head to look at your left hand. You can do this for just a moment, but feel the whole lengthening along that same diagonal you've been working with. From the left hip up to, or I'm sorry, from the right hip up to the left shoulder. Lift your head to look at the hand. All right, very nice. And then come back to rest on your back. And then bend your right knee, stand your right foot, bring your left arm up overhead. And before you make the movement, again, review. You're looking for a movement where this whole kind of symphony of movements take place together. We've described a lot of different moving parts, but you're really looking for a way to go from the shape you're in one movement to being on your left side with the back of your head back and down to the right so that your eyes can be looking up to the left hand. And this is a movement that doesn't spill you over to the left, but it's a sense of turning around your axis as you look up. So the pubic bone reaches down as the chest lifts following the chin and the eyes. And you make the movement as a movement of reaching. It's like the whole thing was you were trying to reach something that was further up the floor, but rather than just using the arm, you support the movement with your whole self. So the orientation of the pubic bone is very important. Think about it reaching down past your left thigh as you turn to the left. But again, your head is moving back and down to the right in such a way that the back of your head and your tail are moving towards each other as your eyes orient up to see the left hand. Just see if this is a little clearer after what you did lying on your belly. Okay, come back, take a rest, lengthen your legs and have your arms at your side. And then roll again to your belly. You can begin by resting your head on the back of your hands. Bend your knees so that the feet are oriented to the ceiling. And then a few times, gently lift the left knee by reaching with the left heel up towards the ceiling. And then pause. You can rest your legs for a moment. And then again, bend the knees, have the feet towards the ceiling. Take your right arm up the floor and begin lifting your whole long right arm. And then including again the lifting of the left knee and lifting the head to see your right hand. And see if you can make this feel like one movement. The knee, the head, the arm, they're all doing something, but it's not three separate things. A sense of one movement that lengthens the front of you along that diagonal so you can look up to the hand. Okay, and come back onto your back. And then, of course, stand your left foot and bring your right arm up the floor. And remember, you're not spilling yourself over to the right. You're not rolling onto your belly, but you're reaching up with the right hand to get something, and you're looking up to the hand, and it's like your whole spine is moving up towards the hand. Eyes orient upwards, the chin is coming up away from the chest, and the back of the head goes backwards, down to the left. And it's a bit of a different sequence than what we did on the other side, but if you like, you could pause and put your left hand behind your head as you were doing before. On the other side, and as you lift the left hip, you can drag your head down to the left, beginning by keeping your face oriented to the ceiling, but then when you're down to the left, you take your hand out and you look up to your right hand. And you can even lengthen your left arm down. So you have your left arm down and your right arm up, and think of reaching with both hands, the left hand reaching down, the right arm reaching up, and see if this helps to sort of spin your chest, again, as you look up to the right hand. If you come back to the original starting position where you're just resting on your back with the right arm up the floor, the left foot standing, again, you could use this idea that the left arm reaches down as the right arm reaches up, and feel how the right side of your chest, you don't just roll over it, it's like it pulls under you. It pulls into the ground to help drive you up the floor to see your right hand. Okay, come back and take a rest. And now stand either foot that you like and bring the arm up overhead on the other side. And just practice this movement a few more times. Make a few movements with the right foot standing, and then a few movements with the left foot standing. And just compare which side feels smoother, which feels more harmonious. And on the side where the movement isn't as clear, where is something missing in the pattern? So you can use the side where things feel simpler and really observe what you're doing. Really engage your mind's eye to see how the parts work together to create the whole. And then can you translate a little bit of what you're finding on the one side over to the other? Okay, leave it all alone. Bring your arms back to your side. Lengthen your legs. And just review one last time in your mind's eye this diagonal path from one heel up to the opposite shoulder. Draw the one diagonal, and then draw the other. And ask yourself again, where do those two diagonal lines cross? Is that a little clearer idea for you now? And then bend your knees, stand your feet, roll to your side, and come up to stand. And see if you can stand as if you're rising up out of the floor. And then just go back to what you did at the beginning. Bring one hand up in the direction of the ceiling and turn to look. And even if you keep both of your feet planted on the floor, can you feel how you turn through the middle? And feel how your pubic bone turns and reaches down as you turn your head and eyes up to see the hand. Try this with one arm and then try it with the other one. And then when you're looking up at the hand, just feel the whole line from that hand down to the heel of the foot below. And then with the opposite foot, try slowly lifting the heel. So if you're looking up at your left hand, I'm talking about the right heel. If you're looking up at your right hand, I'm talking about the left heel. And just see if that lifting the heel can create a movement that passes straight up into the hip joint and up the spine and helps you to see the hand. Okay. And finally, just take a walk around the room. And as you walk, see if you can track the movement of these diagonal paths. So maybe just think about the line from your left hip up to your right shoulder as you walk. Think of the line in front and notice, when is that line a little longer? When is that line a little shorter? And then think of the line from the back of your left hip to the back of your right shoulder. Notice how that diagonal line moves in walking. And then sense what's happening with the other diagonal, from the right hip to the left shoulder. Imagine in front. Imagine in the back. You can even imagine as if you had one line from the hip. It was like a strap that ran over the shoulder and then it attached to the back of the hip. You can imagine how you would move inside that strap as you walked. All right, well, thank you for your practice, and we'll see you again in the next class. Take care.